The most exciting stage of the NHL playoffs are here with the Stanley Cup Finals, which means it's time to bring your A game to your NHL Showdown DFS contests. My name is Jordan Chand. I'm the head coach here at SaberSim, and in this video, I'm revealing my top 5 tips for building winning NHL Showdown lineups. But make sure to stick around through tip number 3, where I'll give you a code you can import directly into your SaberSim builds and take my exact settings and use them for your next build. Let's go ahead and dive right in. Tip number 1 is leave your stacking rules at the door. Now, I know this goes against conventional wisdom, but hear me out. The reason conventional wisdom suggests setting stacking rules is that traditional optimizers are optimizing purely based on average projections. Players are put into lineups on traditional optimizers independently. They don't have a sense of what players are correlated together or what types of lineups represent certain game scripts. Any correlations that a traditional optimizer picks up on are by pure luck, and it's up to you to create stacking rules that lead to more logical lineups. SaberSim is different. It builds lineups that are already optimal for single simulations of how the game could play out. This means each lineup is crafted based on a specific game script, reflecting a realistic scenario of what might happen on the ice. When you set stacking rules on SaberSim that force certain combinations of players together, you're essentially making an assumption that they will all perform well together in every game script. However, this obviously isn't always the case. By forcing these combinations, you might be ignoring possible game scripts where one player could be optimal without the others that they're correlated with on average. For example, let's say you set a rule that if you're using the goal-scoring line 1 center from a team in your captain spot, to use the other players on his same line in the lineup. It is true that these players are positively correlated on average, but what if the game plays out differently? What if that skater scores 2 unassisted goals? What if the final score is 6-5 and the optimal lineup requires nailing every goal scorer in the game? By not forcing these combinations, you allow your lineups to adapt to these various scenarios, giving you a better chance to capitalize on unique performances and unexpected game outcomes. Remember, SaberSim is designed to simulate a wide range of possible outcomes and generate lineups that are best suited for those individual scenarios. You should trust the simulations here and avoid the temptation to force stacks that might limit your lineup's potential in different game scripts. This flexibility can be a game changer in your NHL Showdown lineups, helping you maximize your chances of finding the top lineups by getting to constructions you otherwise wouldn't. And I want to be clear that this does not mean we are ignoring correlation, but rather that these correlations shine through organically in your lineups by optimizing for specific game scripts rather than setting rules of thumb stacking rules about what is true on average. On a practical level, there isn't really an action to take for this tip, but more of a word of caution against taking action. The stacking rules you may have gotten comfortable with using on NHL main slates or on traditional optimizers that aren't optimizing based on individual game scripts will eliminate high-quality lineups from your pool if you set them in NHL Showdown on SaberSim. Tip number 2 is to limit your minimum salary. I recommend around $49,000. And let me explain. NHL Showdown is unique amongst Showdown games for 2 reasons. First, the player pool and the effective player pool is much larger in NHL Showdown. We have 30 plus players projected on most NHL Showdown slates, compared to something like 16 to 18 for NBA, and the players at the bottom of the projections list still have meaningful upside. Where the bottom projected guy in NBA might be projected to play 4 minutes, and the bottom projected guy in an NFL Showdown might be lucky to get a single target, the line 4 skaters on a team have a path to racking up a handful of shots, blocks, etc., and landing themselves in the optimal lineup in the right game script. Second, the contests that you'll be playing themselves are smaller than other big Showdown sports. Because we're competing with fewer lineups, it means it's less likely that any given lineup we might like to play is going to be duplicated by our opponents. Duplication in DFS is always a bad thing. If someone plays the same lineup as us, we have to share our winnings with that player when we win. When we build lineups on SaberSim, we're getting the optimal lineups for the entire range of game scripts. But because that range of outcomes is so wide, we're going to see lineups appear in our lineup pool that leave a ton of salary on the table. These lineups are the optimal lineup for given game scripts, but they don't happen frequently, they don't score well unless the perfect game script happens, and most importantly, they're taking up valuable spots in our pool of lineups from other better lineups. These other better lineups will have higher salaries, project for more points on average, and be optimal or high scoring for a wider range of possible game scripts. And because of the fact that duplication is less of a factor in NHL Showdown, due again to the larger player pool and smaller contests, we don't have to fear duplication of these lineups like we do in other sports. In short, there are literally millions of possible lineups that could be optimal for a given NHL game script. And while SaberSim's lineup pool of 5,000 is going to give us a ton of different lineups to work with, we can set up our build to maximize the quality of each lineup in our pool ahead of time by eliminating these low salary lineups that take on more risk than is necessary to be profitable in contests of these size. It's also worth noting that Contest Flashback does back this up. Our Contest Flashback tool takes each lineup played in an actual contest and runs it back through our game simulations 100,000 times, and then uses the contest payout structure to assign an expected ROI to each lineup and user that played that contest. And while it's not as if low salary lineups never grade out well, the vast majority of plus EV NHL Showdown players are using most of the salary in these contests. Tip number 3 is to shoot for the moon with your captain spot. With a 1.5x points multiplier in the captain spot, we always want to find a player with the potential to put up a lot of points, but that group of players shrinks in the NHL playoffs and the Stanley Cup Finals. As every game becomes do or die, teams tighten up their rotations, giving more ice time to the premier skaters on their team. Line 4 in particular will play less, Power Play 2 will play less, and the top skaters will play more, especially in crunch time, and that affects the upside potential of these players. Our game simulations will do a good job of identifying the best players to use in the captain spot, but they can underestimate the playoff effect on the ice. I recommend removing EV4 or line 4 skaters from your captain spot completely. Similar to the min salary adjustment from tip number 2, this isn't saying these constructions can't be optimal, but rather that we don't have to take this level of risk to beat the smaller NHL Showdown contests. Eliminating lineups with particularly unlikely captains lets us maximize the quality of the 5,000 lineups we build. And it's also worth noting that this is only something I do for the captain position. These lower upside guys are still going to get ice time, and sometimes all it takes for a player to be optimal in the utility spot is getting a few blocks and shots on goal. I just want to reserve that special 1.5x multiplier spot for a player with a clear path to a huge score. So let's go ahead and apply these 2 tips to our build here. First things first, it's easy to increase your min salary. I'll just change this from the default of around 45,000 to 49,000 to get those higher quality lineups in play. And then we can use a set of filters to filter our captain pool to make sure we're getting the captains we want here. I'll go ahead and give you a code in the description of this video here that you can import in your build to put this in yourself, but just to show you how these filters actually work. The first thing is on the EV line. If we right click the column header there, and we're saying that this column is either blank, which lets the goalies go in, and then does not equal 4. So that we're making sure we're removing the line 4 skaters. I also like to add another filter to the projection column and just say filter only by players projected for more than 0. That's just a visual thing. We won't put players that are projected for 0 in your lineups anyway, but visually I just like to see all the players that are projected and make sure that everything's working correctly. Again, there is a code in the description of this video that will let you import this yourself into your build. All you have to do is click this share button and then go over to the load tab and enter the code that's in the description here, and it'll pull these settings into your very next NHL Showdown build on SaberSim. But don't run off yet. My final 2 tips here are crucial to getting the most out of your lineups after they've been built. So let's go ahead and build some lineups. I'm going to assume that I'm playing 70 lineups, which is generally the max in the flagship GPP here. All I'm going to do is change the pool size to 5,000 to make sure I'm getting the largest pool possible, and then make 2 changes to player projections to abide by DraftKings regulations, change the number of lineups to 70, and click build. And while this is building, it's again important to remember that what SaberSim is doing is it's not just optimizing by the average projections in this case. We are taking individual game scripts across the full range of outcomes of the way that this game might play out and building 5,000 different optimals for those game scripts. Each lineup we're going to get back was the winning lineup for the way that the game could play out in our simulations, which means we know that these lineups have the upside and the correlations we need to win. Now that our lineups are built, tip number 4 is to refine the field lineups used in your contest sim. Contest sims are incredibly powerful tools for your NHL Showdown process. By taking each lineup we've built in our pool here now and testing out how it performs in a simulated version of the contest you intend to play, we can directly approximate the expected ROI of your lineups to find the best ones to enter into your contests. With that said, the accuracy of the ROIs are dependent on the inputs used in the simulation. Most importantly, the expected field of lineups your opponents will play. Our NHL Showdown field lineups are solid, but we have identified that our fields have a tendency to assume players will play all kinds of different lineups across the full range of outcomes for the game. And in practice, most players in these contests tend to play a lot more conservatively than that. To be clear, this is a SaberSim problem, and we're already planning to make improvements in this area for next NHL season. But this is a great way to juice up your NHL contest sims for this final stretch of the playoffs. I recommend using the SaberSim field lineups as a baseline, but editing that field to eliminate lineups that use less than, say, 48,500-ish salary, and also removing particularly low projected captains, similar to what we did when we actually built our lineups. And this isn't going to be exactly true. Lineups with lower salaries and with these captains will sometimes appear in your contests, but it is directionally accurate and it is an improvement on the default fields. The default SaberSim field lineups assume these lineups are played at a much higher rate than they actually are in your contests. This is a bit tricky, so I'll walk you through how to do it step by step. The first thing we need to do is go track down the lineup fields themselves. They live in the contest tab in the upper right, and then in the field lineup section, you'll see an option for SaberSim here, and this will show you all of your lineups that we expect to be in the field for this contest. Now let's go ahead and create a custom field here from these lineups, which is going to create a new build here that includes all of the lineups that were in this field. Now that we have our lineups here, we're ready to make some adjustments to make these fields a little more accurate. The first thing I'm going to do is create a filter using the filter icon over here in the right, and then add a filter to remove the low salary lineups from our build. So what we'll say is we'll say hide any lineups where the salary is less than 48,500. And this will remove a pretty big chunk of lineups from our pool. And again, it's not as if these lineups never get played in these contests here, but we think they get played quite a bit more than they actually do in the field. You see we trashed 1229 lineups here. So removing these is going to make your field a little more accurate in terms of what is actually going to get played. The other one we want to do is remove some of the low projected captains. I tend to just remove the line 4 captains just like we did pre-build because they don't really show up very often in the contests. Having eliminated the low salary builds first will actually take care of a lot of those, but we can quickly check to see if there's any remaining lineups here that we need to get rid of by, again, filtering on the EV column. So what we'll do is right click this, and this time we're going to just check to see what line 4 skaters are showing up. If we scroll over to the right here, we'll see that there are 4 lineups remaining in our pool with line 4 skaters. So I'm going to just uncheck all of these here, and then we can create a set of lineups with the lineups we had left, 771 minus the 4 we just eliminated here. So that is 767. There are 767 lineups remaining here. And this now is our field. So the final step here is we just need to download these lineups and upload them as a new build on SaberSim. So we'll download the lineups here, then we'll create a new build here, right click it, upload pool, and upload those lineups. Now we have a field, a separate build here of 767 lineups here that generally represents the field we're likely to play a little bit more accurately. I like to rename this again by clicking right click and rename and call this something like new field lineups so it's easily identifiable for the next step. Now we can go back to our original build and we can create a contest sim for the contest that we intend to play. So we'll open up the contest sim settings, add a contest sim. We're going to change the field lineup to new field lineups. And for the payout structure, we'll assume that we're playing the main slate here, the 5K. Actually, where is the flagship? The kick save. I'm sorry, the 10K to first kick save is the main flagship, and we'll call this the flagship. Save the settings and run a contest sim. Now what's happening is it's taking each of our 5,000 lineups we've built here, plugging it into a version of the kick save using our new refined field lineups and the payout structure for that contest to see if this lineup was played in the contest and the game was played out 100,000 times, what would the lineup's expected ROI be? Now that we have our contest sim complete, we can sort our lineups here by the expected ROI for this contest, and this is going to identify the best possible lineups to play based on the contest sim. Now, before we get to tip number 5, this is the opportunity where you can start to make some adjustments. One thing I like to do here is add a filter so that we can just remove any lineups that had a negative ROI in our contest sim. So we'll say only show lineups where the ROI is greater than 0. And this sets up a nice backstop or a guardrail to our build. As you're making adjustments to your player exposures and inputting your takes about the game here, this eliminates any lineup that didn't come through as profitable in the contest sim. And just make sure you're always playing the best possible lineups and not accidentally letting a lineup that we think is minus EV sneak into your build. You can make any types of adjustments here you have based on your player takes, but for what I typically do, that brings me to tip number 5, which is lean into the 5-1 onslaught type constructions when you're reviewing your lineups, and especially for the underdogs. These types of builds are often an underappreciated stack in NHL Showdown, even outside of the playoffs, and I like them for a few reasons. First, they are pretty unpopular. People don't like building 5-1 stacks, especially on the side favoring the underdog, and it's hard to build these kinds of lineups with average projections and traditional optimizers unless you're going out of your way to force them in. But as we can see, based on building our lineups based on the game simulations, 5-1 stacks are certainly live to be optimal and generally far more often than the field plays them. The second reason I like these constructions is that you get back some extra line-based correlation in your lineups. In tip number 1, we avoided setting a rule to force combinations of players together, but now that we know at this step we're working with a pool of lineups that are optimal for individual game scripts, if we can get lineups that have a little bit of extra correlation in them, that's great, and it increases the range of game scripts that those lineups may be optimal for. You can see, for example, that this first build here has a little bit of a power play 1 stack going on for the Rangers, and these 5-1 stacks tend to get you to those types of constructions. The third reason I like 5-1 stacks is that these constructions are viable in a far greater range of game scripts than they would be in NBA or even NFL, because NHL DFS scoring is so closely tied to goal scoring. Even games that feel close can lead to big disparities in the actual fantasy points scored between the two teams. For example, a 2-1 game has twice as many goals scored and assist points available to the winning team. Games need to blow out by a lot more for a 5-1 stack to make sense in something like the NBA, where upside isn't so closely tied to big in-game events like scoring a goal. In NHL DFS, 5-1 stacks can be optimal for a much wider range of game scripts. And finally, the last reason I like these constructions is that many NHL game scripts lead to one team pulling their goalie in the last few minutes, especially in the playoffs where every game is a must-win. Pulling a goalie results in a goal for the opposing team about 33% of the time, meaning even games that are close all game get blown open easily in the last couple of minutes. A game that stayed at 2-1 all game might end up as a 3-1 or a 4-1 game when it's over because the winning team got a couple of freebie goals in the last couple of minutes. So for all of these reasons, I like to make sure that 5-1 stacks are a big part of my portfolio in my NHL Showdown contests. You can see your stack constructions by clicking the stack exposure tab and looking at the stack type, and you can see we are getting a ton of this type of construction just sorting by the ROI already here. So it seems like the contest sims are also in agreement. I typically also like to check on the team stacks and see what types of constructions we're getting between these two. And in this particular case, again, we are very heavily favoring the slightly underdog Rangers. So this all checks out. The main action item here for me is to double check on these stack exposures. I tend to like getting at least equal to my pool exposure on exposure. And I would recommend resisting the urge to reduce your exposure to these types of constructions if you run a build and see a very large exposure to 5-1 stacks, because these can be very profitable constructions that are underrated by the field in these contests. At this point in the process, I would be totally ready to enter these lineups into my contests, and you are now equipped with everything you need to know to dominate this final stretch of the NHL playoffs. To summarize, my 5 tips are: first, leave your stacking rules at the door and incorporate correlation organically with the sims. Second, set your minimum salary to around $49,000 to build the most effective pool of lineups as possible for the contests that we play. Third, shoot for upside in your captain spot by removing the 4th line skaters. Fourth, refine your contest sims by improving the quality of the field lineups used in those simulations. And last but not least, lean into those 5-1 onslaught type builds, especially on the underdog team, because they are so undervalued by the field. If you're looking for even more playoff showdown action, I've got you covered. I released a similar guide walking through step by step exactly how I build my NBA showdown lineups on SaberSim to get you ready for the NBA Finals. You can check out that video here, and make sure to subscribe to get a notification every time I drop a new DFS strategy guide. I'll see you in the next video.